Before the 19th century, darkness was more than the absence of light. It was a boundary between knowledge and silence, between belonging and exclusion, between a mind ready to learn and a world unsure how to reach it. Imagine living in a time when losing your sight meant losing access to language itself. Books became closed doors. Education, work, even independence depended on the ability to see ink on a page. For generations, blindness did not simply limit opportunity. It placed people at the margins of society. And yet, history has a way of reshaping what once seemed unchangeable. What if darkness could be translated? What if touch could carry meaning as powerfully as sight? This is the story of how that transformation began, not with a grand declaration, but with a child. In the early 1800s, the village of just outside moved at a steady, unhurried pace. Life was measured by seasons, by the sound of tools in workshops, by church bells marking the hours. Harness makers shaped leather for horses. Farmers worked the surrounding fields. Knowledge passed largely through spoken word and handwritten text. At that time, literacy was inseparable from sight. To read meant to see. Schools, where they existed, were designed entirely for the eyes. For those who could not see, there were few expectations beyond survival. Many blind individuals relied on family or charity. Some entered institutions that offered shelter but little education. Even well-meaning reformers struggled to imagine how someone without sight could fully participate in intellectual life. Early experiments with raised letters allowed students to trace shapes, but the process was slow and cumbersome. Books were enormous, costly, and scarce. Reading a single page could take several minutes. Society believed it was offering compassion, but compassion without access is not the same as inclusion. In 1809, a boy named was born into a working family in that quiet village. His father was a harness maker, a skilled craftsman surrounded by leather, wood, and finely pointed tools. As a small child, Louis often watched his father at work, fascinated by the careful precision of the trade. One day, while trying to imitate what he had seen, he injured his eye with one of those tools. Infection followed, spreading despite every effort to treat it. Within a short time, he lost his sight completely. Such tragedies were not uncommon in an age before modern medicine. What mattered was not the accident itself, but what came afterward. Louis's family refused to let blindness define the limits of his life. He learned by listening. He memorized lessons recited aloud. He navigated familiar paths by sound, texture, and memory. Gradually, he discovered that perception did not end when sight disappeared. It simply shifted to other senses. Recognizing his determination, local supporters helped him earn a place at one of the first schools created specifically for blind students. Founded during the Enlightenment, it was built on the hopeful idea that education should be universal. Yet its methods still reflected a world learning how to make that ideal real. Students read by tracing raised versions of printed letters. The books were heavy and difficult to use. Writing independently was nearly impossible. Knowledge could be received, but rarely created. For Louis, this distinction mattered deeply. Literacy meant more than recognizing words. It meant expressing thoughts freely. It meant independence. The turning point arrived in 1821, when a visitor came to the school, a former army officer. He introduced a system he had designed for soldiers called night writing, intended to allow silent communication in darkness using patterns of raised dots. The concept was innovative, but the system itself was too complex for practical use. Its symbols were large, difficult to interpret quickly, and based on sounds rather than familiar letters. The military set it aside. Louis saw something different. Beneath its flaws lay a powerful idea that touch could carry language. Still a teenager, he began refining the concept. He simplified the patterns, reducing them to a compact arrangement of 6 dots, small enough to be read instantly with a single fingertip. With those 6 points, he created combinations representing letters, punctuation, music, and numbers. The design was elegant in its efficiency. It allowed not just reading, but writing, using a stylus to press dots into paper from the reverse side. The very type of tool once associated with his childhood injury became central to his innovation. By the age of 15, he had devised a complete, tactile system of literacy. But history rarely accepts new ideas without hesitation. Many educators resisted the change. They worried that adopting a new code would separate blind students from the wider world of printed text. Some preferred the familiarity of raised Roman letters, even though they were far less practical students. However, quickly recognized the difference. With this new system, they could read more fluidly, write their own thoughts, and exchange letters privately. For the first time, literacy felt immediate and personal. The impact was not dramatic or public. It unfolded quietly, in classrooms and dormitories, as students discovered they could move through language at their own pace. New technologies in the late 20th century introduced audio recordings and computer-generated speech. Some wondered whether tactile reading would become obsolete. But listening is not the same as reading. Braille provides direct engagement with language, spelling, structure, and punctuation understood through touch. Rather than disappearing, it evolved alongside digital tools. Refreshable displays now translate electronic text into dynamic patterns of dots, blending 19th century insight with 21st century engineering. The principle remained unchanged. Knowledge should be accessible in more than one way. Braille's legacy extends beyond the system itself. It reshaped how societies think about accessibility. It demonstrated that barriers are often created by design, not by disability. Inclusive education, adaptive technologies, and public accommodations all reflect the same underlying idea that participation must be intentionally built. It also challenged long-standing assumptions about perception. Western culture had long placed vision above other senses. Braille revealed that touch could carry complexity, precision, and even beauty. In 1952, a century after his passing, Louis Braille was honored by being reinterred in the among France's most influential figures. In a symbolic tribute, his hands remained buried in his home village, acknowledging the sense through which he transformed the world. Today, traces of his work appear in everyday spaces, on elevator panels, medicine packaging, public signage, and classroom materials. Millions read through the patterns he designed, often without considering the centuries of exclusion that made such innovation necessary. History is often remembered through grand events, yet sometimes its most profound changes come quietly, shaped by persistence rather than spectacle. A child's curiosity, a student's determination, a teacher's belief that knowledge should belong to everyone. What began as an effort to overcome personal loss became a universal language of access. The world before Braille assumed that blindness meant separation. The world after him understands that communication can take many forms. Between those two worlds lies a transformation still unfolding, reminding us that progress is not only about invention, but about widening the circle of who gets to participate. Because history does not vanish when it changes shape.